Why and how did you know that you wanted to pursue a career in radio, and how did you do that?
Well, I came to it really late by radio standards. If you talk to most radio people, they knew when they were 12 that this is what they wanted to do. I came to this really late. I didn't really connect the radio dots until I was in my early to mid-20s. And it really happened at Michigan State for me. I got my degree, as you mentioned, my first degree at Michigan in really nothing. It's a Bachelor of General Studies, so there was no TV radio program. I probably would have gravitated to that because I've always loved the media world and the music world, but Michigan only had a speech department. So I took journalism classes, and then I was lucky to get into Michigan State's TV radio program, and they made me take a couple of undergraduate courses because I had no background. So I had to take a TV production course, and I thought, oh, that'll be fun. And I hated it, Ron. Just couldn't stand it. You know, being dependent on 20 other people to make a TV show, I just didn't like that whole scenario at all. And then they made me take the intro radio course, and I fought them. I told them, I really don't need to do this. I took the TV course. I'm fine. They said, no, you've got to take the radio course. And, luck. The guy who taught it was a guy named Jim Ruspris. Nobody knows this guy. He was an instructor. He didn't have a PhD or any of that stuff. And the department stuck him with teaching the production classes. And this was one of those magnetic guys who by the third class, I remember calling my parents and going, hi, I've got a birthday coming up. I need a tape recorder, an editing block, and a year's supply of razor blades because I'm going to be a radio guy. But, that didn't really kind of click for me until I was in my early to mid-20s. And at that point, I felt, I am so behind. I mean, there's all these other people who have been in radio for 5, 8, 10 years, and they're already moving up the ranks, and they've worked in Muskegon, and now they're in Traverse City, and they're going to get to Detroit, and here I am, kind of an old guy, relatively speaking. So I kind of took a measure of myself and realized, or at least concluded, that I really didn't have a career on the air. I didn't think I was good enough, and I really didn't want to spend a decade moving from smaller markets to medium to larges. And so I thought maybe there's a back door, and I got very interested in audience research. The only required class at Michigan State's master's program was a research methods class. And the guy who taught it, Dr. John Abel, was another one of these people who really lit the light for me. I mean, he basically taught me that, look, you may think you're an able radio programmer and you understand music, but when you actually can combine that with audience research and find out what people really like, that's when you really become a master at it. And he was right. And so I came in through the research side. My first job out of college was working for the Frank Magid Company, which most of your viewers, listeners, probably have never heard of, but back in the day, Frank was the only company in America that was doing audience research for TV and radio.
Well, I want to stop you right there because, it seems like a no-brainer looking back at it now, but that's what I'm fascinated. Not so much that you got into it later than normal, but when you think about radio, I want to make radio. Like when you talk to Dick Purton, he knew he wanted to make radio. Like, where does that come from? Even for a 20-something, where, you know what? I'm going to do research. Somebody no one really gives a shit about right now, but I'm going to make my niche in this. I mean, how? I mean, because to me, that seems brilliant in hindsight.
Well, thank you. At the time, I certainly wasn't sure about it, but I just felt that from everything that I was kind of intaking, that so much of radio programming was seat of the pants. And look, sometimes that works. I mean, there were some brilliant people out there, like Bill Drake, who just intuitively knew how to make great radio and jingles that sounded right and how the music would integrate with the jocks. I mean, clearly there are visionary programmers out there who really didn't need research, but for the rest of us, it really is an important tool, and I could see that it was missing. It was happening on the TV side. Magid was working for Channel 7 in Detroit at that time. In fact, I actually got to do some work for Channel 7 while I worked for Magid long before I ended
Very
up
cool.
As part of the ABC group. But radio was not a big part of Magid's work until I got there, and there were a small group of us that loved radio, and we kind of broke off into the radio division, and it was great. We had really big clients. We worked for the RKOs and the Bonnevilles and the ABCs, and a lot of really big radio companies. And frankly, it was a great learning experience. I mean, imagine being a 25-year-old and flying into KHJ in Los Angeles and, WRKO, and it was really cool. WJR was one of the clients of Magid, and here's a station that I couldn't get arrested at 2 years ago. I actually applied for a producer's job with Mike Worf, who did the Kaleidoscope program every day on WJR, which was kind of like a podcast, really. They were like little mini documentaries. And I applied to actually be a writer for Mike Worf and didn't get the job. And here a year later, I'm back doing audience research for the great voice of the Great Lakes. So it was a really heady experience, and it was really exciting. And thank God Tom Bender, who was program director of Riff, hired us, called me directly. His night jock, Sheila Rushlow, was a former student of mine at Michigan State, and she was a big fan, and she said, you ought to talk to this Fred Jacobs guy. He's a good guy, and he could really help with research. And Bender called, and I assigned myself to the Riff account and did a research study for them, and it was the first one that ABC Radio had ever done. When you would talk to Rick Sklar, who was the programming guru of ABC, about research, he'd say, Arbitron's your research. If you want to know what's going on, look in the book. But the problem was Arbitron was just, day parts and demographics. I mean, it didn't talk about why people listen and the feeling that they get from listening to a great radio station or a great personality. So that's where I came in with audience research to kind of provide some insights into why people were doing what they were doing. And it was early enough in the game, Ron, that it worked.